Welcome to the DST podcast, where we discuss issues that are relevant in our Indian context from both a theological and a practical perspective. Here are your hosts for today, Arvind and Ranjit.
Welcome to our listeners. We are glad you could join us for this episode on faith and work. Today we have a special guest, and I'll be introducing our guest a little later. But I have our co-host Arvind joining us this morning. Arvind is a pastor in the Delhi Bible Fellowship Church in Gurgaon. Arvind, you work a lot with professionals. Gurgaon is emerging as the startup capital of India and competing a lot with Bangalore. Why is this topic important for you? What is your sense about this?
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be talking about this topic. Apart from Gurgaon and startup capital and all those kinds of things, work is just a massive aspect of our lives. Every one of us works, whether you're an engineer, teacher, student, housewife, or whatever else it might be. It's just a huge part of what we do every day. And so, yeah, I think there's not a lot of teaching very often in the church on work and why we work and how we should work and all those kinds of things. So yeah, I think it's an important thing to talk about theologically, practically, and that's what we're hoping to do today.
Good. I'm looking forward to this. And we have a special guest, Adi Praturi. Adi is a content development consultant and a content strategist with Breakwater Labs. It's a creative agency that curates learning experiences and curriculum design and communication for various clients. His role also involves helping leaders and organizations think through their content strategy and their needs. Adi grew up in the US and graduated from UC San Diego, where he studied both economics and industrial international relations. He currently lives in Mumbai with his wife Erica. Adi, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. I like how you added an adjective to that degree, industrial international relations. That's new. That's fun. That sounds like a good degree to have.
Yeah, we just gave you another degree in this
Take
podcast.
it. I'll take it.
Yeah. So, Adi, you're quite involved with professionals, equipping them, empowering them, really helping them think through their role in the marketplace. What drew you to something like this? Why is this something exciting for you?
It's a good question. I actually stumbled into faith and work. It's not something that I really set out trying to do. I think we just had a lot of entrepreneurs in our community, and it was born out of that need to kind of be able to speak theologically and meaningfully to what entrepreneurs were doing in our community. And then, out of that, we began to really work on some faith and work issues with all sorts of professionals and entrepreneurs. And I think what really got me going with this is, just it's a very simple message, which is just that your work matters to God, right? It's as simple as that. And the way that people just respond to even as simple as say, like their eyes brighten up, they get really like what God cares about my everyday work from Monday to Saturday. And I think it's that feeling, that response that I normally get from people, like that keeps me going. So I think that's something really special when people like realize that their work matters. And I think that's something that I want people to realize more and more.
Absolutely, that's great. And currently, the entire work industry all over the world and also in India is going through what people call the Great Resignation, and it's impacting the workplace in a massive way. Recent survey says that around 63% of the participants who took the survey said they would rather be unemployed than be unhappy in the job. So this idea of wanting to be happy at workplace and finding meaning is such a core part of who we are in this generation. There's another statistic that says how the attrition rate is more than 20% this year. And the top reasons why people leave their jobs are toxic company culture. That's like 62% of the participants said that. Low salary, 59%. Lack of healthy work-life balance, that's 49%. That's almost half the participants. So all this are key issues right now. Uh, why is work so hard? Why is it so difficult? Why is it so challenging?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And I think, just to add to the statistics that you were reading, like what makes India even more unique than other countries is that you also have surplus labor, right? So you also have a market that is super saturated. Like I think about the space that I'm in, like content creation, right? And in a city like Mumbai, everyone's a writer. Like everyone's just sitting at Starbucks writing something. I'm not sure what they're writing. They're just everyone's writing something, and everyone's in the content industry. And it's definitely a saturated market, right? It's hard to make your name, and I think that makes people disillusioned. And like I think there's all these macroeconomic challenges that add to just even the day-to-day struggles. And I think what you were saying with the day-to-day struggles was absolutely right. Like I was talking to two friends yesterday in the afternoon, and one of them works in the marketing industry, the other works in the finance industry, and they were talking. Both of them work 12-hour days, right? They start their day at 9 a.m. They finish their day at around 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. One of my mother-in-law's neighbors once did a shift that was 36 hours long. She works for a bank. And the reality is that, these 12-hour days are often used quite inefficiently. And there's a lot of inefficiency during those hours, right? People are not actually working those 12 hours as efficiently as they can. So managers think, okay, the way to deal with the inefficiencies is just to ask people to give more hours. So it just becomes this vicious cycle, this constant cycle of just. But I think to get to this question of why, right? Like at least from a biblical perspective, why is work this way? Well, I think part of it comes from our own separation from God's good design for work. I mean, God had a design for work, and I'm sure, we'll talk about that in a bit. But I think why work is so, or the feeling of work is so messed up is it's a result of human rebellion against that design. It's this human tendency to want to determine what is right and wrong ourselves apart from God. Is this very self-centered approach that leads us into trouble, right? And as a result of that rebellion, we begin to experience a lot of this alienation. We experience alienation, separation from God, from other people, from creation, and certainly from even in our vocation, even in our job. I mean, it's a product of the curse, right? This is Genesis 3. Like it says very clearly, cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you'll eat food from it. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. So I think that's the experience of work that we have, right? Thorns and thistles is a good description of the kind of hardships that we experience at work. And it's what's sad is that the very people that you often want to love and serve are the ones that will resist you. So we enter the workplace wanting to be this blessing to our colleagues. Like nobody is waking up this morning and thinking, how can I make life harder for other people? Right? I mean, maybe there are, but I doubt that people mostly wake up in the morning thinking, how can I survive the day? And how can I not be like inconvenience to other people while I'm surviving? That's most people. But we still like end up, really being hurt and getting hurt, right? So supervisors take credit for our work. That's thorns and thistles. Kids are not behaving in the classrooms, if you're a teacher. Thorns and thistles. Husbands are not doing their fair share around the house, like you spend all day writing hundreds of lines of code and then it's chock full of errors at the end of the day. Or you spend all day serving people in the church, you're preparing for this event and then no one shows up. Or you work on a pharmaceutical product, you go through R&D for 5 years, and then like the drug is rejected at human trials. So this is just the experience of thorns and thistles in our life, and I think that's just part of it is just part of it comes out of our human rebellion, our tendency to sin. Part of it is just the natural problems of this world. It's just the brokenness of the world around us. But I think what compounds the problem is that rather than going to God to engage with these thorns and thistles, we look for alternative routes and we turn to other sources. We turn to heart idols, right? So we think to ourselves, if only I had more power in the office, if only I had more power, I could deal with these thorns in my workplace. If only I had more comfort, more hours to myself to binge Netflix and play video games, I could deal with these thorns. If only I had more approval and people loved me more, I could deal with these thorns. If only I had more control over the operations, control over the process, control over the company, I could deal with these thorns. So rather than going to God to really engage with the thorns, we're seeking like these power. We're seeking power or control or approval or comfort to deal with these thorns, and that just makes the problem worse. So let's say like you're in an office, and work is not going your way. So what do? You rule with an iron fist, and everyone is so happy when you roll with an iron fist. Everyone loves that, right? Like, no, not at all. Like, it just ends up creating a toxic work environment, which leads to more thorns. And to deal with those thorns, you want more control, more of the iron fist. So it just becomes this vicious cycle and just keeps getting worse and worse. And that's just the condition of work right now. And
Yeah,
so podcast over. No
we've
hope.
you described the problem well, and I think what you're saying is in some way we also use work for something else, right? And we don't work for the sake of work itself, and that's part of the thorns and thistles, right? So we want more power, so we use
Yeah,
work to gain more power. We
Mm.
use work to gain
right.
more comforts and more success, and so in that way we begin to use not only work. I think we also begin to use people, right? And we want to get ahead
Yeah.
of people. We resent when they are in our way. We want to use people for our own means. So,
Mm-hmm.
like in Genesis 11, it says we want to make a name for ourselves. And you see all of
Mm-hmm.
those break down, not just in the work, but also relationally, these things are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think Genesis 11 is a great example, right? Like, you have this experience of brokenness. People want to solve this brokenness, but rather than turning to their creator, they turn to their ingenuity. And there's nothing wrong with creativity, right? There's nothing wrong with building, but it's the heart behind why they wanted to build that tower. They wanted that power. They wanted to be like God. They wanted to ascend to God's level. Um, and I think that just compounds more and more issues. It just
Yeah.
becomes horrifying.
Arvind, what do you think? Ministry is completely different. I know we are talking about secular work. Is ministry any different, or working in a church? And do you see thorns and thistles in ministry, or ministry is something that is nice and fun and exciting?
It's always fruitful all the time. And I've never experienced what Adi was talking about, organizing an event and nobody showing up. No, unfortunately, yeah, I think everything that has been said so far applies, including trying to make a name for yourself and yeah, basically using, in this case, ministry as a means to something else. All of the frustration, all of the relational issues, and yeah, all those things. So I think, yeah, everything that you've said so far, Addy, is completely applicable to ministry, or I assume any kind of work, even studies or working at home, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So let's kind of pivot, and we see the frustration at work. We see the challenges, and both at the work itself and relationally. But what is God's design for work? And most times we think work is something that is we don't want to work. We are always thinking about our vacation where we can run away from work. We are always thinking about retiring early. So we have this kind of a weird relationship with work. But what is God's purpose for work? What do you think?
Yeah. So, that's a very important question to answer. And I think we need to all take time to answer, like really wrestle with that. Because here's the good news, like right off the bat, your work matters. It matters. And not just, like not just work you do for your church, not just the work of evangelism or prayer, like what we would typically call spiritual work, right? But the everyday work that we do. So if you're a lawyer, writing legal briefs matters to God. If you are an admin, data entry matters to God. And if you're an investor, the way you invest and how you think about the companies you invest in matters to God. And I think there's several reasons why it matters to God. So reason one, I think it's because work is ultimately God's idea. right? So Genesis 2, I think it's verse 15, it says that, the Lord God took man and put him in the garden to work, to till the ground and to keep it, to work the ground and to conserve it. And so right off the bat, we see this element of work and stewardship already from day one. Well, or day six, like technically. And that word work in the Hebrew actually has very close ties to the word worship and the work that the priests would do in the earthly tabernacle. So they're already from Eden, these deep interconnections between the real manual work we do and one's worship rendered to God. It speaks to the fact that it's all inherent part of our design, right? We were never meant to compartmentalize these aspects of our life. And which leads me to reason too that we were ultimately called to create. In Genesis 1, verse 28, like this is what we normally like call the cultural mandate or the creation mandate. It says, God says, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Now that's like really interesting because if you think about it, I mean, just do a thought experiment, right? Guys, like Eden is like this small geographical area somewhere in the ancient Near East. And God's saying, take this Eden and fill the earth. Take Eden to the ends of the earth. And like, what would you need to take Eden to the ends of the earth? Like, what kinds of jobs would you need to do that, right? Like, you would certainly need people to explore. You would need people to pioneer. You would need people to settle in these new cities. And you would need to learn some form of cultivation, some form of agriculture, some form of governance, because some people actually have to stay behind and manage what's, like not everyone can be pioneers. Some people have to stay behind and manage, the what's already been cultivated. And then there's some form of communication, there's some form of economics and trade. You'll need teachers to teach the next generation. So you'll definitely like vocation is part of God's good design. Humans were meant to create. And I mean, I think that's what culture is, by the way. Like, culture is what humans make of God's good creation. Whether for better or for worse, we are all of us culture creators. And I think part of that is also that what we were, why work matters to God is what we create is meant to be a blessing to the world, right? The products we create, the services we offer, the brands we manage, the business models we apply, all of these are meant to be blessings to the world. So God cares about these things because I think through them we can either bless the world or we can be perpetuating the curse, right? So I think that's at least three reasons like why your work matters. It's God's idea, we're called to create, and what we create is meant to really be a blessing to the world. It's what makes the world better. We can make the world better, or we can make the world worse off. So like really being aware of what we're doing to our work matters.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard this statement once, which and I'm going to just paraphrase and make it up right now. But it says how work done well is an answer to prayer, right? And how does God answer people's prayers in this world? I mean, it could be anybody, not just believers. It could be anybody. A widow who is going to the bank and she wants some help in terms of a loan. How is her prayer answered? How is her longing fulfilled? It is when somebody does their work well, right? And they care for her and they actually do their work meticulously and do the paperwork fast and help her with the thing. So in some way, work when we do our work well, it is a way for God to answer prayers. It's a way for God to bless other people, right? Mhm. What do you think, Arvind? What are your any questions or thoughts that you have on this? Why did God create work? Why does it matter?
Yeah, I think I think we might be getting into this, but just the whole earth is to glorify God. We're to uh, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and the whole earth is to resound to the glory of God. It's such a beautiful, holistic, huge vision that God gives when He creates the world. So, yeah, certainly that's much more than just Sunday morning or just evangelism or ministry. So, yeah, quite a spectacular vision that God gives to Adam and Eve when they're just two little people on this massive planet. And yeah, but it certainly involves our work, as Adi's saying.
All right. One of the issues we see, especially among believers and in the church, and it is also reflecting in the culture, is this divide between what is secular and sacred. Right. There's always this dualism. So we sometimes don't fully understand, and because of what we've talked about, we don't fully understand what God's purpose is for our work from Monday to Friday or Monday to Saturday, and we want to run away from that, and we want to prioritize work in the church or in ministry, and we feel like that is more fulfilling and satisfying. So there is this pull between both these things, and some people who work in the secular place and they feel guilty sometimes, and they want to feel like this is better. What do you think? Why is that? Why are we struggling with that kind of a dualism in our understanding?
Yeah, I love this. So our friend Anand Mahadevan, whenever he does a faith and work module, he uses these two questions, and I'm sure you guys have heard it, and I've unashamedly copied him, but he tends to ask leaders in the church these two questions. He says, one, how many of you get upset when people don't come to prayer meetings, Sunday services, or church events? And generally, like, everybody raises their hand, right? And then, boom, he hits them with the next question, which is, how many of you get upset when people go late to work, underperform at work because of procrastination, or don't pay due honor to their supervisors? Not a hand raised, right? And it reveals something. I think it reveals that as leaders, we think that there are things that are more important to God than other things. I think the sacred secular divide is one of the more unfortunate teachings that can like seep into the church, because it's this thinking that somehow spiritual things are more important than material things, and that like in the spiritual is more important than the material. But the Bible actually resists this, right? The Bible actually says, well, no, the spiritual and the material are bound together. In fact, Paul takes so much time to actually say we're going to have a physical body when we resurrect, right? So I think it comes from this difficulty of believing that every square inch on this planet belongs to Jesus, and including our work and our entire life, right? He's not just sovereign over our churches, but over our homes, our families, and our workplaces. So I think we really need to shift our paradigm that all of this is under Jesus' sovereignty. And I think if we think like this, it's going to change how a new generation thinks about work, right? Like, I would love to see pastors asking professionals, like, have you been going to your meetings on time? How is it going at work? What kinds of products are you creating? Right? Are you blessing the world through the services your company offers? And not just professionals, I'd love to see parents talking to their kids about their schoolwork. Like, we have a tendency like to point out witchcraft and wizardry in Hogwarts and in Harry Potter, and we're like, oh, that's bad. But and maybe those discussions need to be had with your kids, sure. But I'd also love to have parents talk to their kids about like how geometry and algebra points to God's mysteries, how botany and physics and chemistry points to his design, how history and economics points to his sovereignty in the world, how arts and literature points to his creativity. So I think that's the attitude we need to have, that God is sovereign over every aspect of life. And it becomes an opportunity to really engage with God, to reveal God as a blessing to the world.
Yeah. And I think that there's another divide also, right? And not just the secular sacred divide, but what I call the income divide. Yeah, typically in India, we love jobs that pay more. It doesn't matter whether we are gifted for it, whether we are called for it. We kind of prioritize jobs, especially the engineering and the programming and the software or the MBAs. So we gravitate towards work that is paying more. And sometimes we really don't understand the work at home, and sometimes even predominantly women who stay home and take care of the home, and they feel they are not really productive, they are not really contributing. What do you think about that? I mean, again, there is another divide here which is very subtle. What do you think?
Yeah, gosh, let's fix this in 2 minutes. Like, I think the I mean, the sociologists will say our tendency to make vocation, like we're hierarchical creatures, right? We tend to think in hierarchy. We want to naturally form hierarchies of I'm better, this person. We want to sort of try to find our place in that hierarchy. But I think a more compelling answer is coming back to those thorns and thistles, right? Like to deal with the thorns, we want more money. If only I had more money. If only I had more status. If only I had more power. If only I had more, fill in the blank. Then people would not abuse me. Then I can deal with these thorns. Then I wouldn't have to worry about this income divide, right? Like I think the more I have, if I had more blank, um, I'll be fine. And I think that just creates this weird perspective. It creates a really harmful perspective that I think is what you're saying. It creates a harmful perspective in the home, that your worth and value becomes tied to the income you're providing, the work you're doing. So like washing the dishes is beneath you, but like leading a company is what real leaders do. Like and I don't think God makes these kinds of distinctions. So honestly, like I think very practically speaking, I think if we're in a position of power, either because of wealth or position, we really need to be thinking about what sacrifice looks like. And not just in a humanistic way, right? It's not just, oh, I'll take less of a paycheck so that you can, like, I mean, that's good. Maybe some of us need to be thinking like that. But I think it's really asking this question: how am I willing to give of myself so that every member of my team or organization or household can flourish? Christ, who's in every way equal to God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. He emptied himself, right? And so he's like him. We're trying to ask this question: how can I give of myself so that others can flourish, both in my household and in my workplace? And I think if you're not in a position of power, I think there's a reality to acknowledge here. Paul addresses slaves in scripture. I mean, sometimes the workforce, like working here, can feel like that, Roman slavery. But I love that Paul is at no point romanticizing slavery, right? He acknowledges the hardship behind it. He acknowledges the brokenness, the cruelty of slavery. But what you do see scripture doing is reminding people with little to no agency that the CEO, the boss, does not get the final word, right? Your manager does not get the final word over your life. And so there's this reorientation to God, who is the one who actually gets the final word. And so then in that sense, we can, to the extent that we can, leverage our influence, positively influence our supervisor. We can lead our bosses, by encouraging them, by kind of in leveraging whatever influence or friendship that we have. We can modestly change culture, even among our coworkers, by at least building trust and vulnerability at that level. So that's kind of it. So if you're in a position of power, you're asking, how can I give of myself so that others can flourish? Or if in this stage of life you're not in what you would consider a position of power, we can reorient our imagination to God and still try to be a blessing, to
Yeah.
our others.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
I think that happens at work and in all our relationships. I mean, for example, marriage. You do the work of marriage, and the same way that you give up yourself for the sake of the other, you do that in the marriage as part of the work of building your marriage, and you do that in parenting, constantly working with children, giving up of yourself for
Yep.
their sake, and you see the creation mandate in all of these things where you're making them fruitful and multiplying their gifts and being a steward of what God has given us. You do this in cooking. I mean, you're able to make it fruitful and multiply. And you see all of the creation mandate and all of this attitude towards work is actually both at home and in the secular workplace. So there is no divide in terms of God. God is not looking at who's making more money. And in fact, our satisfaction at work comes whether it doesn't matter how much money we make. Some satisfaction comes just by the work itself, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just listening to something, and it was talking about a mega church pastor, and he, I don't know, thousands of people, really successful, doing a lot for in the ministry and so on. And then his wife got this debilitating disease or illness, and she was bedridden, I think, for about 20, 25 years. And he left his job and took care of her. Uh, sacrificially and all those kinds of things for a huge part of the last few years of his life, last few decades, in fact, of his life. And some people would consider that a tragedy, or something like a waste. And yet, I think that I was just thinking, God must be so pleased that
Yeah.
he's serving in this way, without pay, without recognition. But well done, good and faithful servant.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. So, Addy, just to let you know, we did a survey among our Delhi School of Theology students, and we asked them about questions they'd like to ask. And believe it or not, one of the top questions that kept coming again and again is, how do we deal with and how do we navigate unethical work environments, unethical practices at work, and especially in India? I think India has come to a good place. I mean, we are still growing in a lot of ways. I think a lot of things are standardized and it's become online, and so there's less room for corruption, but it is still there. So how do people, as a believer, navigate some of these workplace situations which is unethical? What do you think?
Oh, good. I thought the last, since you asked such an easy question, last one, Oh gosh. Okay, let's just be clear. There are some things that are just like illegal. Like, I don't know, if you're selling cocaine, like, I think you should stop. Like, let's just be clear. Like, that's not what we're talking about. But I think just with unethical issues, okay, so there's at least three ways you can respond, right? So the first is this black and white approach, which is that, like, an action that you do, it's always right or always wrong, no matter what. So it doesn't matter if you saved 1,000 lives, if you had to lie to do it, then the lie itself is wrong, right? Or then you have the ends justify the means approach. So the actions that lead to the best outcome is generally the most ethical. So between saving one life and saving 1,000, the most ethical action is what? Saving 1,000. So whatever is for the greater good. And then there's this whole it depends on your motivation approach. So what's in your heart? So if Oskar Schindler is paying hundreds of bribes to save Jewish lives in the Holocaust, clearly his motivation is right, right? Like, if Rahab is lying to save two spies in her house in the book of Joshua, and that's credited to her as heroism, then clearly the Bible's not taking a black and white approach with her, right? Like, it's ascribing something to her motivation. So I think the reality is you have to discern which approach works for which situation, right? I think that's the reality. Like, here's an example. One time I was working, I had to make a rather large purchase for a Christian organization I was working with. And the vendor said to me, if I pay in cash, then I don't have to pay the GST. Now, the organization I was working with was Christian, and they wanted me to pay in cash. And I wasn't comfortable with it because I was like, I think we're contributing to a broken system. I'm not rendering what is Caesar, to Caesar what is Caesar's. For them, it wasn't so black and white because at the time the law itself was unclear. And they had a more ends justify the means approach because it was likely that the money that would have gone there would be going to justice and mercy work. So, like, they weren't just saving it to, like, line their own pockets. They wanted to save it so that they could fund the work that they were doing. So to this day, honestly, I'm more convinced the black and white approach was probably appropriate for that situation. But I also see their point. Like, I get it. And I think generally we should aspire to be as truthful as we can. If you manage a brand, avoid exaggerating what your brand can do. If you work in consulting, don't exaggerate the data. If you work in finances, don't participate in insider trading. Like, these are pretty cut and dry. But I think, in our faith and work class, we talk about, like, this 4-step process. And the step 1 is, like, really learning to respond with love. Like, understand that everyone is broken. The whole situation is broken. You're broken. The person causing you the angst is broken. So, like, try to enter the situation with love. And then interpret the situation in love. Like, ask what is the most fitting response in this situation. And don't just try to answer that question alone, right? So that's step 3. Bring community into this. I have 4 or 5 guys that I bring into these conversations. I listen to their whole counsel before I make a decision. And then once in a while, step four, I have to confront the other person in love. And there's a risk that comes with that, but there are times you can't afford to be silent. And you really have to have wisdom, because there are times when you need to like wait, and there's a time to speak up. And knowing the difference between the two is wisdom, right? But hey, this is a big conversation. Like we have an entire module. We talk about this for 2-3 hours in the Faith and Work course. So I can direct people there. But I think it's an important question. But I hope I did some justice to it.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
you know,
I like your point about bringing community in, right? And a lot of
yeah.
times we sometimes struggle with some of these issues alone, and we feel like the whole world is against us, and we don't know what is the right thing to do. And sometimes we feel like we are messing up. And this is where God has given us much wisdom in the community. God has given us other professionals, and God has given us teachers and people in the
Mhm.
community who can encourage us, be with us, pray for us, and even guide us to some extent to kind of help us see this issue, right? And so I think that point is also very important, right? So that we are not called to just live our own life with a secular place, but we have a community of God, community of faith that is able to guide us in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Arvind,
it just makes me think
any
also.
yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
it makes me think that as a pastor or even others in the faith community in the church, that when people come with genuine questions, we shouldn't just assume they're bad Christians or something like that, or take a black and white
Mhm.
approach automatically. But to really genuinely hear, because many issues are very complicated, and I think that the professionals or working people in our faith communities tend to be a little bit reluctant to bring these up, even as questions, because they'll just be shut down or given a simplistic answer or something like that. So yeah, I think that's also really really helpful, the community aspect of it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Another question that was a big question was the whole idea of work-life balance, and I think people in India especially struggle with that. You see people working through the night, you see people working in the weekends, people not able to come to church, and there's all kinds of challenges when it comes to work-life balance. Uh, when somebody comes and tells you they are so busy at work, apart from the fact that they are busy and there are demands at work, but when busyness somehow becomes the buzzword, right?
Yeah.
And every excuse for anything, right? So they're busy, so they're not able to spend time with the kids. They're busy, they're not able to come to church. They're busy, they're not able to come to a small group. They're busy, they're not able to spend time with the wife or husband. What does that communicate to you, a busy life?
Yeah. Wow, that's a really important. This is one of probably the most important question I think for our generation, because I think being consistent. I would know, like in my 20s, like it was my favorite thing to tell people that I was busy. Like I think because there's some aspect of worth and value you find in your busyness, and that's one. I think some people just like those guys that work 12-hour days, like time is like I'll speak to them in a second, but I think generally if we're always telling people we're busy, we should just be mindful of where we're actually trying to seek our worth and value, right? Like I think rest in the Bible, like God did not just on the Sabbath stop because he needed a nap, right? Like it's not like he did all these works. He's like, okay, I did a lot. I need to just take a break. No, it was a purposeful stop because he was showing us that part of creation is enjoying creation. Part of doing the act of work is learning to enjoy the fruit of work, to look and to see that it's very good. So the truth is, like now outside of work hours, I'm not that busy. During my work hours, I'm busy. I'm meeting my teammates, I'm working on content, I'm on strategy meetings, I'm being pulled into podcasts. But outside of work, I'm not that busy. I go to the gym, I play video games with my wife, I play with my dog, I read the Bible, I read a book about theology and culture, I watch anime, you know. I get dinner 2 or 3 times a week with good friends. And it's a full life. Like I think now, I know there are some people who work 10 to 12-hour jobs and they can't do anything about it right now. Like, my advice is if you can negotiate those hours down without losing your pay, then, you should do it. But more often than not, you can't. And so I think in that situation, I think we need to make full use of whatever break time we get. That's one. I think make sure we're getting plenty of sleep. because I think the temptation in those types of jobs is to overcompensate. So you stay up until 1 or 2 in the morning, and that's an issue, right? Like we start to lose sleep. We're operating on like 5-6 hours of sleep a day. Like I think we need to like really focus on getting healthy meals and enough sleep, and then your weekend is yours. Like let Saturday be whatever you want to do. Sunday I think should be a little bit more community oriented. Like if that's the day you have service, then budget that time for community, right? But honestly, a 10 to 12 hour job is not sustainable in the long run. Like I think I started looking for opportunities to move out of that when I got a chance. But I mean, for a while I had to do that, but it is it is the reality. I can offer one other piece of unsolicited advice that nobody was asking for. Like another practice that like I've been really trying to get into is the discipline of closing work at the end of the day, you know. So at the end of the day, I'm learning to say, okay, God, thank you for the work I did do. That's because of you. I repent for the ways I procrastinated and wasted my time, and I'm releasing whatever work I didn't do until tomorrow. And I trust you. You know, if my boss calls me and gives me an earful, I trust you. You'll see me through that. But I'm going to release my day to you, and I'd love to see more people learn how to close the workday and just release work to God, because I think that's what reveals trust, right? You're trusting God with your work. You're trusting Him to say, "I'm done with work," and whatever happens is in your hands. You know. So I think that's another practice I think would be awesome to see.
Absolutely. I love what you said, right? And I think in some ways that also shows that we have other work to do. It is not just the work that we do in the marketplace, but there's other work of friendship, work of serving God, work of marriage and parenting, all those kinds of things. And that takes priority too, right? So, and I also love this idea of finishing the day, but also finishing the week, right? Every week when we finish the
Hmm.
week, and that's part of Sabbath. Sabbath is saying,
Yep.
hey, the work is done for the week, and now I want to rejoice in my
Hmm.
Creator, my Savior. So, so it is the rhythms that God has given us in those aspects.
Hmm.
Right? That's wonderful. I think it's very practical too.
Yeah, I
All right,
love it.
my last question for you. We're gonna wrap up. My last question is: we always want to know what the church can do for professionals, right? We always want to know how can the church build community for professionals? How can the church be more effective with professionals? But I'm not going to ask that question. I'm going to ask you: how can professionals actually impact the church? How do you think professionals can actually come alongside the church and be a blessing and be part of the strategy, the gospel, and the mission? What do you think?
Yeah, I think one, like three things right off the bat, like, and I mean, I'll end up speaking to pastors and leaders as well, but I think just three things right off the bat is like, know that your calling and your giftings are being cultivated, not just for your workplace, right? Like your creativity and all that's being cultivated for the whole of life, right? And your community is part of your calling. Just as much as your workplace is part of your calling, just as much as your household is part of your calling. You were designed to live a whole life. And so, like, all these skills that you learn in one place transfers into another. So, like, it is, whatever we're cultivating at work is meant for the community. So, the first question is, like, within reason, like, how can I serve in my community using the gifts I've cultivated at work? And that's one question that you can be asking. The second is be willing to share your work testimony. I love like a work test, and this goes to pastors too. I think one of the best things to do once a month, on the pulpit, get someone up there to share their story. Ask 4 or 5 simple questions. What do you do for work? What do you find good about your work? What do you find challenging? How do you think God is moving in your workplace? How can we pray for you? Simple. That's it. And I think when you start sharing workplace testimonies or work testimonies, it creates culture in the church. So I think both as professionals, we should be willing to talk about work and willing to talk about what we think God is doing in our workplace. And as pastors, we need to invite those conversations. And then the third thing I'd say is, within reason, like I know some people work in corporate offices, like invite your leaders into your workplace, wherever appropriate, like especially if you work in cafes, if you work in studios, if you work in like an art studio or something like that, or an art gallery, like invite people into your workplace, at corporate parties, whatever, wherever and wherever appropriate. Like you can invite your leaders into that space so they can see your life outside of church. So you want to integrate life as much as possible, right? That would probably be the most practical thing I can think of. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adi, for this episode. We really appreciate all your thoughts and ideas. You do the faith and work, um, uh, the training and the course. You want to just quickly mention what that is and where people can find more information on that?
Yeah. So the Faith and Work course is like an 8 module course. So we have different variations of it. There's a small group course, and then there's an 8 week online immersion. And we really get in depth into topics like spiritual disciplines, ethics, workplace relationships, process, and operations. And we really get into the nitty gritties of how we could shape a full theology and practice of work. And I think if you want to get in touch with me, I think the best way would be through you guys at Delhi School. Like maybe like if they can reach out to you or Ranjit or to you, Arvind, like you can always like get in touch with me. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk to anyone more about it. And there
Absolutely.
are awesome other resources as well, like that, like I love the Theology of Work website. I think it's a great resource. So, like I think there more and more people are thinking about faith and work that I'm getting more and more excited about.
Any book that you would recommend for people?
One book, I mean, there are two. I think obviously every good endeavor is sort of has been the go-to, and that's Tim Keller. Because but I think one book that I've been kind of is on my mind is, uh, uh, it's a children's book, but I think it's awesome, and it's called "The Creator in You" by Jordan Rayner, and it takes the gospel as story and the gospel for work and puts it with beautiful illustrations. Beautiful. It's a great book to read with your kids. It's like faith and work for kids, but it will bless you as well. And Jordan Rayner has some awesome books also on a lot, like Call to Create. That's also really awesome. Andy Crouch, Culture Making, has been a formative book in my life. So yeah, but I would pick up Creator in You. Like I just saw it. It's just like it's a children's book, but I swear it will change your life. Like it's so beautifully written.
Yeah, let's not swear on the podcast, but uh,
Sorry.
but good. Arvind, any final thoughts? Anything you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just can't help but just thinking about the gospel again and going back to the gospel, how Christ, renews us and
Mm,
transforms us. He cleanses us, forgives us, and and sets us on a different kind of path that is, yeah, just moving into the original plan of God for creation and even so much more. And so, yeah, thank you, Adi. This has been really, really helpful
yeah.
in, yeah, thinking through faith and work.
Yeah, thank you, Adi. Thank you, Arvind. Thank you to all our listeners who've joined us. We enjoy bringing this to you, and I hope it's a blessing to you. We'll see you in the next episode.